I never wanted a daughter. I always wanted boys, 2 of them. I looked forward to being outnumbered for the rest of my life, and I loved shopping alone, so it was going to be fine. And after having my son and knowing we were going to have a second child, I never even questioned the why behind that want. And then it happened. It's a girl. I was noticeably saddened, and I didn't have the language to convey my disappointment, so I would just say things like, well, I guess I just wish I hadn't saved all my little boy clothes for nothing. But there was more to my sadness, let's be real, my devastation, than some wasted infant clothes. You see, I had grown up in a household that was mostly female, and I had felt empowered by it. Neither of my parents ever told me there was anything I couldn't do. In fact, quite the opposite. And I always believed that because my father respected and prioritized my mother, my sister, and me so much, it helped me to know that my value didn't lie in my gender. Which then made me question even more deeply, why in the world would I not want a daughter? Well, it was October of 2013. I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, and I was teaching the novel The Great Gatsby. We'd reached the part in the story where Daisy narrates the birth of her daughter. She turns to the nurse. What is it? A girl. All right, she says, then I hope she's a fool, because that's the best thing a girl can be in this world, is a beautiful little fool. Now, in reading this line and explaining the complexity of Daisy's sentiment, I suddenly realized this was why I didn't want a daughter. You see, Daisy's obsession with the gender of her daughter and tying it directly to her lack of knowledge, but also her physical beauty, are all based in her own experience. Daisy is empowered by her beauty, but she's also intellectual enough to know that it doesn't elevate her to equality. Therefore, she wishes for her daughter to be beautiful, but also beautifully unaware of a hierarchy that elevates her and degrades her, all at the same time. If she's beautiful, she'll reap many benefits. And if she's stupid, she'll never know the rest. Now, in teaching this novel for years, this was the first time this passage had ever resonated with me. I suddenly found myself empathizing with the villain of the novel. I, too, wanted my daughter to be beautiful and foolish. I suddenly found that I hoped for my daughter to be spared all the knowledge I'd gathered over the years of what it was to be female. I often tell people that there's a curse to parenting, also to teaching. You know what your children are going to face. You faced it yourselves. Now, I've helped 18 years of girls navigate all of the hard lessons of being female. The narrative has never changed. But now I was going to have to watch my daughter learn those same painful lessons. This knowledge that we know what our children will have to endure because we ourselves have already survived it, and knowing there's nothing we can do to change it, that's the paradox of parenting. You want to save them, but ultimately, you know you can't. You see, I had learned that even if you grow up in the most empowered of households and you feel your worth far beyond your gender, something in the world would change that. You see, the narrative that surrounded being female was so powerful, it extinguished things that I knew to be true about myself. It made me forget. Whether it be those well-meaning friends and family who said I shouldn't become a principal at the age of 29, how in the world would I be a good wife and mother? Or that superintendent who turned me down for a promotion because I was pregnant. Didn't I have more important things to worry about than my career? That man in the bar who thought my body and everybody else's was his to touch, and the owner kicking us both out. Him for groping me and me for doing something about it. The relentless messages of the media that our value is tied in what we mean to others, that we get the love that we deserve, that we are to blame for the things that happen to us. But then there was more. I wanted to skip a daughter because I didn't want to tell her she'd be paid less based on her gender. I didn't want to tell her that grown men might catcall her on the streets long before she was old enough to understand why. And I especially didn't want to tell her that if she was ever sexually assaulted, she would be questioned about what she'd been doing or wearing to cause it. How are we supposed to explain that to our daughters? And finally, how would I tell her that that same beauty that is valued and prized when we are young dwindles and renders us meaningless and powerless as we age? So what was I going to do about it? How was I going to nurture a warrior? How was I going to make my daughter ready to go to war with this world every day? In case you can't tell, my concern was for my daughter to not be weak, to never be caught vulnerable, and to never be seen as feminine, because the world had taught me that femininity was synonymous with all of these things. Now, when I thought about what that meant for her life, it saddened me. But how else was I going to make sure that gender didn't permanently code her status the way it had mine? Now, I'm lucky. I'm surrounded by lots of strong women in my life. My husband's two sisters both have degrees and careers in fields that are often coded for men. Yet I have never seen either of them behave as they don't have an invitation to the boys' table. I have friends who write and teach about feminism, and my life is literally filled with women who fight bravely for women's rights. They aren't afraid to take up space, and they're certainly not afraid to be heard. And I wanted to gather together all of these women and say, tell me how. How can I raise my daughter to be just like you? Now, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that I spent a lot of that pregnancy sitting across the table from parents of strong female students and thinking, would it be weird to ask them parenting advice? Now, I didn't do this as much as I wanted to because anytime I get a wacky idea, I hear a voice in my head. It sounds a lot like my husband. And he says things like, Heidi, that would be weird. Don't do that. But seriously, before I had a chance to have these conversations, something else happened that let me know exactly what I needed. It was December of that same year, and I was now 8 months pregnant with my daughter, when another driver hit me head on at almost 45 miles per hour. I still remember that moment, knowing that standing on my brakes wasn't going to be enough, that swerving was too little, too late, and just bracing myself for the impact. When I woke up, smoke was pouring out of the front of my car, the airbags were all deployed, and my rearview mirror was hanging haphazardly on a wire next to me. There was blood all over my face, and the pain that I felt throughout my body was excruciating. But I could only think about one thing, that little life that I'd been obsessing over. What if I had just lost her? I was so broken. How could she possibly be okay? The injuries just kept stacking up. Broken leg, bruised ribs, broken tailbone, lacerated spleen, whiplash, black eyes, rolled ankles, seatbelt bruises, a new pain every few minutes. But pain is nothing in the face of fear. And the fear that I felt for my daughter's life was insurmountable. How had I failed her so fundamentally before she was even born? Now, as the paramedics lifted me out of my car and onto the stretcher, I kept protesting, please check me, please check her, I'm pregnant. And as I protested further, that's when it happened. I felt her kick me right in the ribs, just like old times. And in that moment, I knew it. I'm not alone. She's still here. She is still fighting, and she is so much stronger than I ever gave her credit for. Soon, a wonderful nurse snuck in one of those machines that finds fetal heartbeats and let my husband and I hear that strong, determined heart beating in that little body. And the vision before us was eerie. By now, most of me was visibly broken, but in between the deep purple of those seatbelt lines, my abdomen was untouched and unmarred, like nothing had ever happened. These moments and hours recoded for me what it meant to raise a girl. I was no longer concerned with feminine weakness. If this accident has taught me anything, it's that I am far stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. And so was she. I was already giving birth to a fearless young woman. You see, that evening I realized that my obsession over her gender was because I too had bought into the narrative. And that was a reactive practice, reactive to a world that had broken me and broken my image of what it meant to be a woman. The goal was no longer to raise a girl who could fight off the world. The goal was to start to change the world so that that fight wasn't necessary. Now I know, big change can be intimidating, and maybe you're even one of the people who believes we've come far enough. But I'm here to tell you that the status quo is not working. In fact, at any point in time, good enough never is. And the even harder thing is I'm going to ask you to make a change that may never benefit you, but it could change the lives of all of our kids. Now, I will tell you that when I sought to make this change, I had to go with something I knew. And I know language, I teach English, and I talk to kids every day. So that's where I started. For example, I refuse to ascribe to the lie that we tell our girls and the behavior that we perpetuate in our young boys that says if he hits you, he likes you. Because that is absolutely untrue in real life. And we would never say it to a victim of domestic abuse. So why do we tell it to our children? It is far easier for me to teach this to a 5-year-old than it is for me to unindoctrinate it from a teenager who believes, because we've told her it's the truth, that it's an appropriate way to be shown love and affection. My daughter deserves better than that narrative, and my son is better than that narrative paints him to be. With this in mind, there is no conversation that is too much to have with my children, regardless of their age. My son saying he wants to kiss a girl in preschool is actually the perfect time to talk about consent. It's not the time to talk about it being sweet or appropriate. I'll also tell you that I get it wrong just as many times as I get it right. For example, that conversation about consent, when my son told me he wanted to kiss a girl, I was like, this is it. I've prepared for this all my life. I'm ready to go. And you would have all been so proud of the conversation we had about respect and what we owe other humans in our lives. And when it was done, I was like, I'm probably winning an award. Maybe I should write a book. I don't know. So you can imagine my surprise when I picked him up the next day and he pulled that girl into a tight embrace and planted a kiss directly on her cheek. I was livid. I was like, you two, come here. In retrospect, not a good choice. I didn't know the girl, but another day. So they came over and I said, did he ask you permission? And she said, he did. I said yes. So, not quite the parenting victory I had thought it was. So I made a new rule. As we walked to the car, I said, okay, buddy, new rule. No kissing anybody who isn't family. I even made a list of who those people were. But as he sat there, I could tell something wasn't sitting well with him. So I said, buddy, what is it? And he goes, Mom, I just don't understand. I thought friends were the family we choose. And some days it's my job to teach the lessons, and other days it's my job to learn. Even when it goes wrong, there's no better time than now to have these conversations. Not when he's older, not when it happens again. Regardless of our want for our children to be innocent forever, that is not a real plan. My husband and I also decided a long time ago that if we wanted our daughter to know she was more than her physical beauty, then we needed to tell her that. We compliment her courage, her spirit, her intellect, her amazing sense of humor, and we do call her beautiful. But it is never the first compliment we reach for. We know that our children's first internal monologue is created by the words we give them about themselves. And we wanted to make sure our daughter had a multitude of adjectives to pick from. We never use gender as an insult in my household. We don't tell my son to be a man or to stop acting like a girl because we can't expect any gender to value something we mark as not worthy. And I know what you're thinking, Heidi, it sounds like a lot of work. Do you ever just want to let it go? Yeah, I do. The other night, I had just gotten done working out, and I walked into my son, and I said, what do you think? Does Mom look any stronger? And he said, oh, Mom, you do. And don't worry, it's okay that you'll never be as strong as Dad. Men are just stronger than women. And I'd had a long day, and did I mention I'd just gotten done working out? And I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna let it go. But my husband walked in the room behind me and he said, buddy, that's not true. There are lots of women who are stronger than me. It's not just about how much you can lift. And I will tell you, I knew he was a good man when I married him 12 years ago. But if you had told me that he would be the greatest ally for everything I'm passionate about, I had no idea. How we talk to our children, not just the ones in our homes, matters. We have the privilege of writing the narrative that surrounds gender for all of our children. But if we continue to perpetuate the stereotypes, the tropes, and the falsehoods of that binary of masculine and feminine, we cannot hope for them all to simply realize that we are humans. Now, in case you couldn't tell by the title of my talk, this was about my daughter. But if you were paying attention, this is actually about me. Because her existence forced me to remember something I had learned about myself as a young child, but had subsequently forgotten when I got out into the ugliness of the world. But really, this is about my son. Because when I speak of the change I want for her, it's the same change I want for him. I've always felt my son could do far better than what society expects of his gender. The age-old lie of boys will be boys needs to be done. And are we starting that conversation when we should? Or are we hypocritically flipping the script on them when we believe they are old enough to understand? Now, I began with a novel. I talked about language, and it seems only natural for the English teacher to end with poetry. This poem is from Rupi Kaur's book, Milk and Honey. I want to apologize to all of the girls I've called pretty before I called you intelligent or brave. I'm sorry that I made it sound like the only thing you had to be proud of was something you were born with, when your spirit has crushed mountains. From now on, I will say things like, you are resilient, or you are extraordinary. Not because I don't think you're pretty, but because you are so much more than that. Thank you.